Welcome back to the Hearthstone Wild Open. I'm Gimli, son of Gloin, joined by my dwarven compatriot Magni Bronzebeard, and we are here to, I guess, really just discuss the clinic we just watched.
Wow.
The General won the war against aggro.
And what a fantastic finish for him as well, risking the Gadgets and Auctioneer rather than trying to set up a bigger defense, drawing three armor cards on that turn and just getting so much extra health.
I was going to say, I want to take a moment here at home and saying, oh, the General got lucky there. He drew his armor cards. Listen. You got to put that Auctioneer down to draw those cards, and he put himself in the position to win. And that was honestly super fun to watch backstage.
That's the way the game works. You got to put yourself in winning positions regardless of how grim it may look. You got to take what you can get.
All right, well, he's going to be joining two players from China to help make up what is still being built as this top 8 that's going to be playing at the live finals in July. He'll be joining Shenhai Yuyi and SH Royal Baze. General in good company here, but looking to get one more representative from Europe, which is where we hop in here now. It is going to be Bertik taking on ZerO in the lower bracket. And I haven't necessarily heard as much about ZerO, but Bertik is actually a fairly well-known player from the Czech Republic. He's out there playing both Wild and Standard. He's someone who's actually a high-level poker player, which, obviously, Nathan, given your background, there is a lot of crossover in being someone who's mathematically oriented enough to be great at poker, as well as a game like Hearthstone.
Yeah, it's a lot just about fundamental play, understanding where your percentages lie, learning when to take risks as opposed to when to conserve yourself in certain points. Hearthstone, a little bit more to the point in terms of the amount of pressure you have to take risks.
Right.
In certain games. In poker, you tend to just fold if you don't like your spot. But a lot of just the fundamental skills translate over in terms of just risk identity.
Yeah, that fundamental skill certainly there for the General. We'll have to see if it's also there for Bertik and ZerO. But yeah, this is the lower bracket, so obviously these players did take a loss at some point. We can actually get a little bit of a closer look at that a little bit later on, but they're standing here and they're ready to do it. We see the bans come in. Shaman for ZerO will be unplayable. Bertik will be without his Priest. What do you make of these bans, Nathan?
Well, the two things to really look at here is the lineups. The most picked classes so far in the European region have been Warrior, Druid, and Shaman. Warrior is not present in either of these lineups, and Shaman is not present in Bertik's lineup, and that is speaking volumes for what his decks must look like. A lot of times players are going to try to target a specific lineup when it comes to Conquest, a specific deck you want to be the weak point. The anticipated Warrior and Shaman being two of the most picked classes and thus most targeted classes hasn't brought either of them.
When I was talking to a lot of the players just on Twitter, I was having discussions with them. How do you even approach this, right? For a standard HCT tournament, you kind of at this point understand what are the 3 or 4 valid strategies for how you approach a championship event. For a lot of these guys, it was kind of, well, I just pick what, seems most powerful. I pick what I'm most comfortable with. But we're starting to see the players who are really separating themselves from the rest of the pack. They have a whole other approach, and, we just saw. Aggro decks, not a problem for the General. We'll have to see if, Bertik and ZerO have come in with an equally strong plan of attack.
And that's part of the metagame development too. This is the first major Wild tournament that's taking place, is this one right here. We're seeing stage 1 of metagame development, and because there's such a wide range of cards, it's difficult to simply identify what are the most powerful strategies. A few months ago when I was playing Wild, we didn't have these crazy Druid aggro decks. Freeze Mage was thought to be one of the most powerful decks, period. Pirate Warrior was there, but we didn't have the refined versions that we have at this stage, and that's part of what's drawn the competitive scene here, is once you put some money up for grabs, they're going to go at it. Professionals are going to work hard to start breaking those formats and working towards that point.
That's certainly been an interesting point to me, is how many of the players that have made it thus far are the players who are Wild dedicated specifically versus some who, to your point, saw the prize pool, saw an opportunity to compete again and bring them out there, though they're primarily Standard players. We're going to be seeing Freeze Mage versus Aggro Druid. Aggro Druid definitely one of the powerhouse classes in Wild at the moment. Nathan, what do you think of this matchup?
This is an interesting one for sure, because this matchup can be very devastating for Freeze Mage if they don't have a couple of key cards. I would say probably the most important card in the matchup is right in the center of Bertik's hand right now. It's Doomsayer. It's able to offset the early pressure that ZerO will apply very reliably, and it also buys him some tempo, and that's a very valuable resource as well. In this matchup, Bertik's not trying to burn out ZerO quite as much as he is in traditional style matchups with Freeze Mage, where you get Ice Lances, you get Frost Bolts, you get Fireballs, you discount him with Emperor Thorson, and you giddy up. In this matchup, it's about stabilizing, and so a card like Alex Straza in his hand, it's bad to see right now, but that's usually a defensive tool for him. So his main goal is to simply eliminate the pressure that ZerO is applying and hope that he can stabilize with Giant Tools afterwards.
Certainly worth noting that both of these decks are in a different iteration, fairly popular right now on the standard ladder, but there are some key differences to be aware of. The Aggro Druid is a little bit stickier. We've seen in some of the egg variants, which have earned it the title of Egg Druid, that make it a little stickier. Nerubian Egg in specific is one of those cards where it plays really well around Doomsayer. You put the Doomsayer down, bam, suddenly that O2 Egg is a 4/4. There's a lot of differences. The Freeze Mage certainly has a greater width in terms of how wide it can go in terms of damage.
Yeah.
But it's missing a couple of the other features that kind of make standard Mage really powerful.
That's right. And a big thing to note is just the secret generation, where Freeze Mage is playing Mad Scientist to try to tempo out those secrets sooner. The format tends to be a little bit faster, and as a result, that's better than having a stronger body and having the access to secret in your hand. They're going to play pretty much the same thing every single time. So the other thing to think about is ZerO has a tremendous reload effect with Jeeves. Jeeves was a card that, when it was released into Hearthstone at the time, was not very playable. There was a lot of mid-range decks in the format. You didn't have a way to take advantage of significant early starts, and it fell by the wayside. But now, this Aggro Druid deck can just simply empty its hand on the board as quickly as possible, get Jeeves online, and draw a couple of extra cards. Those extra cards find you Living Mana, they find you Mark of the Lotus. You're able to reload that pressure consistently turn after turn, even in the face of board clear.
And we see both tools now in ZerO's hand kind of line up with what he's doing, which is just going wide on the board, pretty much playing everything out of his hand. We saw him use the Galaka Crawler after, just getting rid of patches, making a stronger body overall, because both Savage Roar and Jeeves kind of play to this strategy. If you dump your hand, Jeeves gives you that reload you were talking about. If you're going wide on the board, Savage Roar is suddenly an incredibly powerful tool.
Yeah, I will say it is unique that he chose to eat the Pirate beforehand, because the extra minion on board would have provided extra damage via Savage Roar. So maybe he's thinking that he's not even going to Savage Roar this turn, that he was just simply going to play Jeeves for pressure. But the other thing to note is the way Bertik's been playing. Notice he didn't play Doomsayer early on. It's just simply because he has Frost Nova. If he can live long enough and land a Frost Nova Doomsayer, it's almost certain to activate at that point. But it's going to cost him in the meantime. This is some pretty hefty damage that's coming out here.
And I really like this damage coming in. It's ZerO realizing, okay, I want to get the most out of my Jeeves, and I want to go ahead and get the most value out of Savage Roar before we enter the chain of freeze turns, which is inevitably coming up. So really good read there from ZerO. Bertik bringing out the emote and has the ability now to go Frost Nova Doomsayer. He chose to hold that Doomsayer for exactly this moment. Obviously could have played it out on turn 2. One with the coin, but yeah, this is going to be a cleared board.
Yeah, it is going to be a cleared board. And the big thing to note here as well is his turn 5. The addition of Medivh's Valet in this deck means that he can actually just get something on the board to fight. Typically, this is one of the weakest turns for Freeze Mage is turn 5. You don't do very much. But being able to just set anything there to try to fight means that Blizzard is going to exacerbate the problem. It's checking Jeeves right away. It means that that 2/3 on board can live through an attack and fight the next thing as well. It's able to pop Nerubian Eggs and start pressuring them with Blizzard. He's got a lot, even though he's only at 9 right now, I'm sorry, at 8, he's looking at being able to stabilize this game and really push forward to that Alexstrasza turn. Once Alexstrasza lands, if he's safe, it's about as GG as it gets.
Right, and now we're starting to enter, as I mentioned, that chain of turns where all that freeze is going to be online. He's going to have some time to kind of figure out what his game plan is to survive, because to your point, he's not looking to burn out the Druid. He's basically just looking to exhaust the Druid of resources and bring his health high enough, utilize Ice Barrier, Ice Block, just keep himself completely protected, and then over time, maybe Alexstrasza hits for 8, you start huck and burn, but you're mostly just looking to strangle out the Druid.
And that's one of the big reasons why you see a lot of professional players favor Freeze Mage, is its flexibility in game plan. It is fairly linear at times when your plan is simply to burn them out, but when you gotta make do with what you got, there's a lot of maneuvering to go. And Bertik, he's like, you know what? I got this game locked up. I'm going to grab some more juice and come and sit right back down. He knows that he is, despite his life total, in a fantastic spot right now.
Yeah, meanwhile, ZerO in a less fantastic spot. Yes, he can play down the Jeeves, he can play down the Power of the Wild or the Mark of the Lotus, but this is really not where you want to be spending these buffs, and you can't fully empty your hand, which is the big problem here. Really just, there's such a profound difference in terms of drawing 2 cards off Jeeves versus drawing 3. He really just wants to be drawing as many cards out of his deck as possible. Just so many decks.
Ideally, he would draw his entire deck. That'd be
multiple decks.
Yeah, multiple decks.
There's that Dragon Egg. So we don't have access to the list just yet, but you can see here he's on the plan of probably having Dragon Egg and Nerubian Egg. When you look at kind of how this deck is built right now in Wild, Dragon Egg isn't an auto-inclusion. Some people kind of not sure where they want to be with that particular minion, allowing them to go a little heavier into, the 5-mana spell, Living Mana.
Yeah. And that's a big reason why you're seeing Bertik hang on to these Blizzards right here. He's knowing that the way that he loses this game is probably back-to-back Living Manas. If he expends a Blizzard right here to full clear the board, what ends up happening is 2 living manas in a row could be enough to actually end this game. The fact that he's choosing to play it this conservatively, I think, is a brilliant move. Again, continue to play very aggressively with your life total. Rely on ice barriers to keep you safe. You know, there is some nominal risk of a double swipe turn here, and he would lose the game in that instance. But he knows that that possibility is very unlikely, and as a result, take the risk. Not a big deal.
It really speaks to how you approach tournaments when you don't have access to the deck list. You really have to play as carefully as possible and make sure you're considering all your outs until you're in a position where you obviously have to pull the trigger or lose.
Yeah.
But he's not anywhere near that point just yet, so he has a little bit more HP to play with. The barrier's gone off now, and he's just, to your point, kind of thinking, okay, how do I lose from here? How do I make sure that doesn't happen?
Yeah. It's part of that risk assessment.
Yeah.
It comes into that. It's very wise at this point. Another factor that too is just the second ice barrier. You know, if he's not getting attacked, he never gets a chance to clear that card out of his hand. And with his hand being as strong as it is right now, and at 7 mana, he needs to be able to just simply dump his defensive cards.
All right, ZerO choosing now if he wants to dump these Mark of the Lotuses onto this board. It is certainly not the sort of board you want to be using Mark of the Lotus on, but may just decide, okay, I just have to get something going. I have to push damage now. With the cat, and you know that's what he's going to go ahead and do. Just jam the 5 damage in there and say, I got to keep going. I have to be the aggressor. If this goes too long, I just lose automatically.
Yeah, here's the thing. He's under so much pressure right now that he really had only one way to play this turn, which was to start moving in on his board presence. His only other option this turn was to go for the 3-2 on Power of the Wild, and then use Mark of the Lotus to double buff that board and move forward. If he'd done that, he'd be very weak to Blizzard, and honestly fairly weak to something as simple as Frostbolt. So what he's chosen to do here is hang on to a Mark of the Lotus, and he wants to land a living mana alongside Mark of the Lotus in the coming turns. That's one of the most powerful combos you have, and he's going to hope that that's enough. Bertik, just turn after turn, though, is going to show him so many strong defensive cards that ZerO is going to realize this game is headed south.
And this is a point TJ and Frodan made earlier, which, yeah, you look at aggro decks, they're obviously in a vacuum extremely powerful. If you're looking to grind and just kind of get stars, they're certainly the quickest way to do so. But when you enter a tournament setting, there's no rule in this young metagame that we're kind of discovering in Wild that strictly states aggro decks are the better way to go. And thus far, it seems like the aggro decks are kind of having a little bit of a poor showing.
They are feast or famine style strategies. They rely on card synergy early on. They rely on explosive starts. And when they go uncontested in the strongest ways, they are monstrously powerful. But when your opponent has coin Frostnova Doomsayer, you don't have the egg to back it up, and you don't draw the Innervate for the Jeeves to empty your hand, and your opponent has all the defensive cards necessary, you are going to have a tough time. Medivh's Valet, I think, has just been such a fantastic addition to Freeze Mage decks. You know, this card has pretty much always been available to Freeze Mage for as long as it's been out there. And recently, people discovered how powerful it was because they had to use Arcanologist to start working with it. And then in Wild, people are like, hey, you know what? We got Mad Scientist. That secret just comes out for free. That's an earlier Medivh's Valet. That's 3 extra damage. Just a fantastic card. That little bit of extra defensive pressure is enough to offset even some of the strongest aggressive starts.
I made the point earlier that there's a difference in the way standard Freeze Mage obviously has to be built from Wild, but it's not that Wild doesn't have those tools. It's just that the Wild Freeze Mage has so many really good tools that it doesn't have to run certain things that standard mages do. So they really get to kind of have their cake and eat it too with cards like Medivh's Valet.
Yeah, that's one of the things I love about Wild is that there's really no limit to the amount of power that you get to stuff into your deck. And oftentimes you find yourself building a deck and you go, I mean, I wish I had 6 more cards I could add in here. You just can't do that. You got to find a way to get only 30.
All right, well, Primordial Glyph, one of those standard cards that is absolutely making its way into Wild Freeze Mage, is such a powerful, flexible card. And look, you see here all the options. You have access to cards like Echo of Medivh. You have some secrets that have been cycled out. You have an even wider range off Primordial Glyph, and it's just so incredibly powerful based on the matchup and based on what you need in that situation.
Yeah, the strong part about Primordial Glyph to me is simply the mana investment. You put in 2 mana now, and oftentimes that unlocks 2 mana later on. It allows you to do some turns that you just simply can't if you had drawn the ideal card. You know, like Meteor, for instance. Meteor always is 6 mana unless you Primordial Glyph it. And a 4 mana Meteor allows you to do some crazy things at times.
Yeah, you'll gladly pay 2 mana today for a Meteor on Tuesday.
That's right.
All right, well, Bertik deciding now if he wants to commit the Mad Scientist, the Acolyte of Pain, or the Doomsayer. Looks like he's... I think all of them are pretty reasonable here. At this point, there's nothing that really stands out as like the knockout, like we got to do this now.
Yeah.
I think there's arguments for all 3 cards.
All roads to Rome at this point. He's got taunts in the way. He's about to stabilize his life total. He's got board advantage, zeros out of resources. This is this is going to be the nail in the coffin when he lands his Alexstrasza. ZerO has no way to kill an 8/8 right now.
And certainly ZerO kind of knows what's going on. ZerO's played a lot of Hearthstone. He sees the writings on the wall, but at this point it just behooves him to, at this stage, when he loses and he's out, he has to play this out, has to see what he can possibly find, make something happen. Maybe he draws into Living Mana, maybe the Blizzard is in there. So you got to kind of keep trucking and just kind of see what you can do even in bad situations.
Yeah, you hope for the best. I mean, even we heard Green Sheep say it at the Hearthstone Championship Tour. He's like, even if it's only 1%, that's more than 0% if you just simply quit. So
I mean, you got a 6/8 there. 6/8s are pretty good.
They're pretty good.
Yeah.
They're not as strong versus 0 Teutons when there's nothing else to clear the way.
But one thing to note is that the Dragon Egg will spawn the small whelp, so every source of damage it takes does, in fact, put pressure on the board. So look at the upside. Let's be positive gamers.
Glass
Nathan.
half full.
Yeah.
Glass half full.
That Dragon Egg is half full of whelps.
Yeah. Well, Bertik's life total is about to be half full as well, or is ZerO's about to be half empty? We're going to find out. If he does not Alexstrasza this turn, I would be astonished.
Well, looking at the rest of his options, there really isn't anything that stands out. If you put down the Doomsayer, in theory, from what you can see, the Doomsayer would clear if nothing else comes from the hand, but you might not see that Alexstrasza. You might be bamboozled.
I am stunned by that. It's important to note that freeze effect from Blizzard does apply after all the damage is dealt, so any spawning effects like Nerubian Egg, not Nerubian Egg, spawning effects like Dragon Egg or what's the other minion that spawns something when you deal it damage? I can't remember the name of it right now. Like the Hogger, the big Hogger. The evil Augur. Patron.
Doom of Elwyn?
Yeah.
Hogger, Doom of Elwyn?
Anything that spawns from the damage will get frozen by Blizzard as well. So it is a fairly low-risk Blizzard. And I'm guessing he's looking to maybe use the Alexstrasza offensively if that's the case.
All right, well, he's seen enough now. He's going to go ahead and play that Alexstrasza. I was kind of trying to figure out if there was maybe something he was playing around with double Savage or some kind of combination. But if he'd Alexstrasa'd himself, he could have definitely played around that, get the 8/8. His health is up super high, and then double Savage Roar really is just kind of a drop in the bucket.
Yeah, this is checkmate at this point, though. I'm being able to draw the Ice Lance and freeze the lone attacker on board means there's no way ZerO can test any of it. Game 1, Bertik.
Well, ZerO respectfully gives him the well played, and living up to the name as currently 0 wins in this series. Looking to change that, though.
Yikes, Rob. Just as you mentioned positive gamers, too. You see one glass half empty Alexstrasza, and you just move in. I'm
a results-based gamer as well, so positive results-based. How do they actually coexist?
There's no question about that.
No.
All results from Rob.
So Bertik goes ahead and gets that first win, and it's important to note that if you actually do a little bit of research into Bertik, he's someone who advertises himself first and foremost as a freeze mage player. That's kind of his big thing. He really enjoys the deck, so no surprise to see him navigate that not even well, but just extra cautiously. Just wants to see more of the deck, wants to figure out what he could potentially lose to. He's not in a situation where this is a ladder game, and you're just like, well, I just want to get done and jam the next one. So
yeah,
I like it.
Information is a big point. Like maybe he sees one key tech card that helps him make a decision later on. By extending the game, 1 or 2 turns, maybe he sees that emergency tech card or sees something crazy happening. It's little things like that that make a big difference in tournaments when you're talking about certain
Nathan,
kinds of, what are you doing?
Nathan! It's a Wild Freeze Mage deck. We found it out there, and now we're going to be able to break it down for you. Nathan, Wild Freeze Mage versus Standard Freeze Mage. What are the key differences?
Well, the big one to note is Ice Lance. Ice Lance rotated to the Hall of Fame outside of Standard very recently, and rightfully so. Freeze Mage would be immensely powerful in Standard if it had access to that kind of burst damage. So that extra damage means that you can simply spend time dedicating to combo and find those ridiculous turns. Big part of those turns is Emperor Thorson, who left the format. Being able to discount a critical mass of cards in your hand, and then, of course, Mad Scientist. The ability to tempo out the secret sooner than you normally would is a big deal when it comes to Wild. People have more powerful starts. As a result, you have to spend less time developing board and more time offsetting it.
All right, well, the tables are going to flip a little bit here. We see Bertik switching gears, going with that aggro druid, and it is going to be ZerO on the Reno lock. Yeah. Nowadays, we refer to these singleton decks as Kazakis decks, but Reno's back in Wild, and he's like, yeah, you take a backseat, Kazakis. It's all about me. I'm the one healing us to 30, and rightfully so, he reclaims his moniker here in Wild.
He's certainly very powerful. There's no question about it. Reno dominated the Standard format for a very long time. It was pretty much the metagame defining card. When Kazakis entered into the mix, these decks just became more powerful, having such a strong tool. But ZerO's going to mulligan it in this matchup, and part of his concern is just, once again, the ability to fight the early game. Druid is typically an aggressive class when it comes to Wild, and as a result, ZerO goes, you know what, I need to find Mistress of Mixtures or a Zombie Chow or Mortal Coil, just anything to fight early for the board. He says Kazakus isn't good enough. One of the best cards in the deck.
Yeah, I think Demon Wrath with the coin here, what he ended up getting here, his hand, for the record, is just much better than what Bertik ended up getting. Bertik kind of got the Ultra Punish there a little bit on the mulligan. Sometimes you mulligan really aggressively to get exactly what you need. You draw your patches, you draw Market Lotus, Power of the Wild, and Jeeves, and that's certainly not a powerhouse hand for the Druid. Meanwhile, ZerO has coined Demon Wrath, the ability to just put out that Mistress of Mixtures. If you see something really big, you know, Bittertide Hydra is certainly out there in Standard. You got that Blast Crystal Potion if you truly need it, so this is a really, really stacked opening for ZerO.
Yeah, and that doesn't mean Bertik's out of the game. You know, Aggro Druid doesn't necessarily need an explosive start in order to win. Backup plan is load up the board with a lot of minions at once and then buff them all. If you get them outside of Demon Wrath range or sometimes even outside of Hellfire range, the fact that you presented multiple threats at once can be a big difference. And so Bertik is struggling with the decision here of whether or not he should power the Wild, because he knows that if this Mistress of Mixture stays on board and another minion comes out, it's going to be difficult for him to have that explosive turn. So he's going to try to contest piece by piece until he can find that one turn to unload everything. Another important facet of him is just to unlock Jeeves. So Innervate here is probably his best draw, even though his hand isn't that strong.
All right, we'll go ahead and get an all-important draw for Aggro Druid. The old Pink Bird, Ruiner of Worlds, Vicious Fledgling, He Who Must Not Be Named. You hear that noise? That is the noise that wakes people up out of their beds at night. That's pretty good.
Dark Bomb.
But there's the answer. Wow, this is very...
You and I were just talking about this card this morning.
Yeah, it's incredibly powerful. And it seems very plain, right? You just spend 2 mana, you do 3 damage, but it's in the early game such a powerful card for just making sure, like, hey, we just don't die to Pink Bird.
Yeah.
That's really important, not dying to Vicious Fledgling.
You clear small priority threats in the early game. And even late game, this card's still very powerful. The little bit of extra reach or the ability to clear off a minion that survives some AoE. Those are all very big facets. And here, Bertik, drawing 2 beasts in a row is really important as well. I'm curious if he wants to use Mark of Yasharaj this turn, or if he wants to try to invest in the patches, maybe get the Jeeves online a little bit earlier. These are 2 very different decisions.
I personally like the Crawler into the Mark of Yasharaj here. I think putting down that 4/5 on the board, Shadow Bolt probably is not being run in this deck. Shadow Bolt's one of those cards that when you have access to all the cards, Shadow Bolt might not quite make the cut. And even then, it wouldn't have the ability to deal with a 4/5, so it'd have to be Shadow Bolt, Coin, Mortal Coil to really deal with it. So I certainly like it just being a big 4/5. The card draw, to me, is almost kind of an extra benefit that is just icing on the cake.
Yeah, we used to play Chill and Yeti a lot back in the day. But Piloted Shredder, this is one of those cards that really took over that slot. This guy is so powerful. And
millions of Yetis put out of work.
ZerO having to face down Living Mana now. This is the reason why he wants that AoE so very badly. Is a turn like this is something he's got to take care of. The Piloted Shredder is going to leave him with a minion behind, and he's going to wipe out this entire board. This is about as strong as it gets if you're in ZerO spot.
And this is really where Demon Wrath shines. You know, there's points in this game where you think, okay, in the very early game, there are going to be points pre-buffs where there are minions at 2 health. The Demon Wrath shines here. But yeah, the Living Mana is just, that is where it's an A+ card, and don't really get anything too impactful off the Shredder.
Yeah, just 1/2 body. Nothing super significant there, but does help fight. You know, against a 1/2, that's a Mortal Coil activator.
And that really speaks to the value of Shredder and why Shredder was such a dominant card. It's just you're leaving something behind there, and it makes you so durable against area of effect cards. It makes you durable against removal. Silence is kind of a niche thing that is run at certain points by certain decks. Back in the day before Keeper of the Grove saw nerfs, it was just kind of everywhere for Druid, but it's really not in any one deck now as like a prevalent thing outside of Purify Priest.
Yeah, it's also just difficult to justify a Silence to kill a 2-drop. You know, this deck does play Twilight. Yeah, Twilight Drake. I don't know why I wanted to call it Azure Drake. Oftentimes will run Sylvanas. We see N'Zoth in ZerO's hand. Sylvanas, a very likely card to be in here. Even if you had a Silence effect, it's difficult to justify simply to wipe out a 2-drop. And you also have the big payoff potential in Pilot Shredder. Shielded Minibot, Mailhouse Mana Storm. Some great cards you can grab there. Bertik, meanwhile, he's fairly limited in his options. I think he's got to start moving in.
Had an option there where he could have played down the Firefly, the Flame Elemental, the patches, go ahead and use the Mark of Yasiraj and then the Lotus, and then he's good to set up for the Jeeves on the former turn. Feels like he just wants to go ahead and expend less of his cards, keep some of those key buff resources.
Well, he draws living mana too, so the Jeeves is a fairly difficult card for ZerO to answer right now. There's only a few cards in his deck that will take care of it, and oftentimes they're his more powerful cards. Blast Crystal Potion, Siphon Soul. He does have both of them, but they're also very costly in mana. So if he's using these and he doesn't have a way to back himself up, maybe the board gets overrun in that situation. Here, with Mortal Coil, I expect to see that to start on the patches, and then he's going to make a decision, should I sacrifice mana with the Blast Crystal, or should I use my Siphon Soul and the coin? This is two decisions that are fairly similar in the way that they approach this, but he's got to shut down Jeeves this turn, I think.
Do you ever just let it live and maybe play the Sludge Belcher?
Ooh.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds crazy, right? Just, you don't know. This is the thing. Now, generally in Wild, we haven't seen a lot of Bittertide Hydra in these lists, but those are big premium threats. And if you're truly just playing for the worst case scenario, Bittertide Hydra into potential Bittertide Hydra, goes ahead and just deals with it. I definitely like that, but it is a thought I would at least entertain is maybe, can you lead the Jeeves up? Is that something you're super scared of?
Yeah, it's something you're definitely scared of, because what happens then is all of Bertik's poor resources turn into something significant, because then he starts drawing 4 cards a turn. The Reno Warlock deck doesn't have the liberty of simply emptying its hand and trying to offset that Jeeves potential. Bertik, if he's able to draw that many cards, just gets 6-7 guys out and finds a Savage Roar. That's enough to end the game. So Jeeves becomes a very high-profile threat in this one, not for its power, but simply for its ability to regenerate your card economy.
Yeah, very well said there. Definitely like just getting rid of it. Sludge Belcher is certainly going to reach a point in this game where he's going to see some use. Sludge Belcher is definitely one of those cards that, as much as at the time I kind of maligned it, I actually really miss Sludge Belcher these days. Sludge Belcher was a great wall.
It's a great wall. Best wall. Bertik, he's struggling here. None of his plays look very appealing. He knows that this is right into an Abyssal Enforcer turn from ZerO, but with his hand, he doesn't feel he has the options. Living mana going to get shut down here. ZerO instantly plays it, and Bertik is now in a heap of trouble. If
you're a fan of player reactions, that was a great sequence where he really kind of agonizes over the choice there, plays the living mana, ZerO just slams it, and Bertik just has to look away. He just has to turn his head. He's like, I can't watch this.
Now he draws the Innervate. You need the Innervate early on. Savage Roar, no help in this spot. Abyssal Enforcer, Hellfire on a 6/6 stick is nothing to scoff at. That's a beating, and ZerO is about to move towards the lock here. The Great Wall will be built.
I actually never figured out exactly what Sludge Belcher says. Some feels funny.
Yeah, I mean, look at his stomach.
Well, I mean, it's open.
Yeah, I know. That doesn't feel funny
to me. You
could
sleep in there, Nathan.
I don't want to.
It's like Tauntaun style. Just slice it open and just get in there. All right, well, that is going to do it. And wow, it is just open season on aggro decks thus far. So if you're one of those people out there who thinks, ooh, aggro decks, I'm not a fan, this is probably a little bit of schadenfreude for you.
The concession looks a little bit early, but it's not. That game has been completely trounced. He's out of cards. He knows that it's just going to be monstrous threat after monstrous threat from there. All a downhill battle. No reason to sit there and lose the game and get in a poor mindset. Just scoop it up. You lost that one.
Mindset is very important. It's very important to kind of exit a match thinking, okay, no, we lost. We got out when we realized we lost, and we're just mentally prepping for the next game. Short memory.
Yeah, just like me. Short memory.
All right, well, let's go ahead and take a look at a key turn from there. Sorry, the part of the Control Warlock in Wild that really makes it so powerful. Nathan, if you had to pick one card here that you think really stands out that Warlocks no longer have access to that makes this deck super powerful, aside from Reno?
Aside from Reno?
Yeah.
Probably, I'm looking at Dark Bomb and I'm looking at Zombie Chow. Zombie Chow gives oftentimes that redundancy in the early game that you need to simply offset early pressure. The 1-mana 2/3 isn't meant to be an aggressive card. It's meant to just fight extra minions that are there. Dark Bomb doing that same job. It's meant to just simply destroy an enemy minion early on so that it doesn't deal you a lot of damage. When this deck doesn't draw Reno Jackson, it can find itself in troublesome spots, and so it's important to keep boards in check. But really, the entirety of the deck and the way that it functions is built differently because of Reno Jackson. Having access to a major heal card in that fashion means that you can justify playing 30 different cards. Right now in Standard, because of the lack of healing that Warlock has, they're fairly limited when it comes to control options. You're looking at decks that will move more towards Mountain Giant, that'll move towards Blood Bloom and Doom, that sort of stuff to really have those major swings. It doesn't have access to that giant heal that stabilizes life total, allows you to draw so many extra cards.
Right, and just want to point out at home that these are obviously not the deck lists the players are bringing. These are just kind of examples to show you what it's like in our standard reality versus the wild reality we're currently visiting today. So certainly a lot of options in how you build it. Zombie Chow might be something you don't even end up including. You just think Mistress of Mixers. You don't necessarily have to run all these cards. These are just cool tools that when you're out there playing wild, you can utilize.
Yeah, they're commonly found. When you have access to cards that go back to the beginning of Hearthstone, rather than just the latest couple of sets, you do find tools that you will and won't play with at times. It depends on what you expect your opponents to do.
Absolutely. And next up is going to be Paladin versus Druid for these two. And Paladin now, this is when I was first getting into Wild and I was first starting to play it, I was kind of looking for what recreated the glory days for me of GVG mid-range Paladin. This was the first deck I ever hit Legend on. It was one I just played a ton, so I was like, how do I kind of recreate this? And Paladin, okay, Secret Paladin, really powerful, sure, great. Yeah, turn 6, Mysterious Challenger, Secrets, Christmas Tree, got it. But, this duded it. That's just constantly putting dudes on the board, constantly buffing them with the Light Infused Stegodon, Tarim, the Quartermaster. You have so many different ways to buff up these big Paladin hands. It's been really exciting. I'm curious to see if that's what this is going to be. And it looks like it is probably that. Lost in the Jungle and Steward of Darkshire, certainly dead giveaways for what kind of Paladin deck we're going to be seeing. Meanwhile, ZerO going to be on the aggro Druid once again. Going to go ahead and try to get that win.
This matchup is really cool for me, too. Bertik's deck is going to be functioning around almost specifically Silverhand recruits, where, as you mentioned, Lightfuse Stegodon acting as a cheaper version of Quartermaster. Quartermaster was one of the most powerful cards in Goblins vs. Gnomes when it released, because if you had 3 or 4 Silverhand recruits in play, suddenly Quartermaster was 5 mana and 10 power on a single turn, and 8 of that power got to attack immediately. That's a huge deal when you're talking about Muster for Battle being reintroduced into these decks. But ZerO has a lot of game in this particular matchup, and a big one is because of Dragon Egg. Being able to buff Dragon Egg and start attacking Silverhand recruits right away means that he starts making a lot of little Dragon Whelps. That's a problem for Bertik, since his main goal is to keep a lot of 1/1s on board. So this matchup really about who can take control of the board and keep it.
Yeah, Dragon Egg into Mark of the Wild is actually just an extremely burly 1-2 line of play there. You get that up, you have to deal with it as a Paladin. You're not running Silence. You're just going to continue to generate more value, more whelps, and it really does stop you from actually ever getting that all-important foothold. The good news, though, for Bertik is this Paladin deck doesn't necessarily need to win in the early game, even though it's a more pressure-centric kind of aggressive deck, because it has the reload in most of these style of decks with Stand Against Darkness, Muster for Battle, Steward of Darkshire giving your Silverhand recruits Divine Shield, give you just really powerful mid-game swings, even if you've lost the board in the early going. And Equality is another tool that, Druid can get the big board. Equality Consecration can help you get it back, though, and then suddenly you're the one with the reload.
Yeah, and that's a really important facet that Bertik was looking for. I mean, you see the smile on his face. He simply chose to hero power on turn 2. I mean, Coin Muster for Battle is one of the best plays that's out there. But he knows this Dragon Egg is going to fall down to 2 health very often. And so in this spot, ZerO has one of 2 options in front of him. Number 1 is he can hedge his bets against a Coin Consecration by using Mark of Yasharaj just to buff up the egg. Or number 2 is he can just try to buy value with his hero power. If he's wise, he will find a way to use Mark of Yasharaj, and he actually uses it on the 4/3 instead and just starts to push damage. I think this is a fairly brilliant play too. The problem with this is that in the face of Consecration, he's losing that Dragon Whelp. So there is an inherent amount of risk to this play, but he's going to end up with a 2-1. ZerO's going to end up with a 2-1 in play any way you slice this. And with Jeeves and with Living Mana in his hand, that's exactly the turn he's looking for, is be able to get another threat online that Bertik has to answer, and then Living Mana try to go for that killing blow. But this was a big turn for Bertik.
It's really understated just how important it is to draw out that Consecration prior to the Living Mana turn, because that is Living Mana in so many matchups. Once it comes down, if it's just unchecked, you just lose. That's what happens. Living Mana is the ultimate do you have the answer card for Druid these days, and getting rid of one Consecration certainly tells you that you are in the clear in some respect. You also draw out a coin, which is low-key a pretty important thing.
It's really important to get the Consecration out. I mean, that's really the big thing to illustrate, is no longer having access to that. ZerO has a lot of 2/2s that he can make. So
all right, there's Stand Against Darkness in the hand. Definitely want to call out this card, because this was a card that really never in Standard kind of reached its full potential. Everyone was just kind of looking at it as, well, you're paying 5 mana, you're summoning 5 1/1 Silverhand recruits. But in Wild, in this deck specifically, it is kind of contributes to this deck's identity of kind of the ultimate expression of overwhelming force all throughout the early and mid game, just putting more things on the board, buffing them. You also have to have the answer pretty much every time if you're a slower deck.
You got to unite the dudes, and that's
bring them together.
Strength
Make more
and numbers.
dudes.
Strength and numbers is what Paladins are all about. 5
well,
1-1s.
the light. They're also about the light.
Yeah.
Yeah. Big swords.
Yeah.
Yeah. They're about a lot of things.
Tyrion.
Please don't downplay the Paladin lifestyle, okay? We do a lot of things. We're not just about dudes, but we're also about dudes.
Well said and well met. ZerO gonna forego the living mana on this turn and gonna choose to power the wild this turn instead. I'm really surprised by this play because one of the most powerful follow-ups you can have to living mana is simply buff them. And so ZerO might be, low-key fishing for a second consecration in this spot, but Stand Against Darkness was a card that he did ignore by not living mana. If he chose living mana this turn, this Stand Against Darkness, it'd be nothing this turn. It wouldn't be a useful card. Now, suddenly, Quartermaster, Lightfuse Stegodon, those are very real threats to ZerO at this point, and he doesn't have a way to check this super effectively unless his Sir Finley he just picked up can provide.
It is interesting because if you feel you have to address the Stand Against Darkness and what it has created, then you may have to think, I have to use the hero power, in which case you don't actually have the ability to play the living mana. It is a really big deal with the line of play he took, and I don't necessarily dislike what he did, but again, it is certainly not respecting Stand Against Darkness.
I personally dislike what he did a lot because I want 5 2/2s on board. He could have added 9 extra power to this board and said he chose to add 4. I don't like that at all.
That's a strong statement. That's admirable.
Indeed. Living mana was a strong play.
All right, so Finley in the deck. Finley certainly another card that we have seen switch into wild, gives aggro decks a lot more flexibility, gives them access to hero powers they probably shouldn't have.
Oh, yeah.
That are just incredibly disgustingly powerful. So curious to see if Finley ends up coming out here after the hero power. Yep, there it is. And what are you generally looking for here, Nathan?
Well, in this spot, he's looking for exactly Fire Blast. Fire Blast allows him to start picking apart this board the way that he reliably wanted. Again, Stand Against Darkness is a major threat here simply because of Quartermaster and Lightfuse Stegodon. So I like the way that he approached this turn, but the consequence of not playing the living mana really illustrated here.
Yeah, now double Light Infused Stegodon, the last 2 cards drawn for Bertik, and they don't really actually do much here.
No, they don't do here, but the muster for battle is... It's gonna heat things up a bit. I think ZerO is in a lot of trouble.
We are starting to get to that point where, realistically, ZerO has to start closing out this game. Bertik has huge power points just for the rest of the game, just off muster for battles and the second Stand Against Darkness. So, yeah, ZerO really needs to start getting a move on. And again, I don't want to necessarily harp on that turn, but the turn you disliked, that was a turn that he really could have started putting his foot on the gas.
I think that's the one to look at. I don't want to harp on it either, but it was a very important turn for him to get going.
We'll harp on it a little.
Yeah, I'm going to keep harping on it.
Let's harp on it.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's go get some glasses of wine and get really catty about that.
That's harp-beamerable.
I'm not even sure TJ could make that a meme, and TJ's gotten really good at putting your face on memes lately. All right, what was the best choice there for the Discover? Do you like the Tarim?
Tarim, for sure. I mean, with all the dudes that are going to be coming out here, this is what it's about.
Yep. It is certainly one of the greatest upsides of Stonehill Defender is all the things it can do for Paladin.
Yeah,
You have the Wicker Flame Burn Bristle, you have the Tarim, you have the Tyrion, even the Grimestree Protector. It's non-legendary, but sometimes it is a pretty powerful choice.
Yeah, honestly, all of his options there had some merit to a certain degree. The Abomination acting as a pseudo-consecration against a card like Living Mana, and the Secatron just being a very efficient taunt body, but he wants to start threatening ZerO right back. This is an important facet of control decks. You don't just need to take control of the game. You need to take advantage of the control that you grab. If you don't start clocking your opponent, it gives them a chance to get back into it.
Fire Blast, as you said, though, is such an important tool here, going to allow him to, per turn, deal with at least 1 Silverhand recruit, and that is incredibly relevant given what Bertik's game plan kind of is here.
It's not quite too little too late. I mean, the Living Mana is still very strong in this spot, but given Bertik this little extra time, that's extra time he has to draw Consecration. It's extra time he has to find Lightfuse Stegodons or Quartermaster to cut into the effect that this card would normally have. This is the turn, though. If ZerO gets past this one fairly safe, draws a key card, could still be looking at a win here. Double equality, but no clear in hand. It doesn't feel quite as good to invest all of your minions and not be able to kill the board. I'm looking at Muster for Battle and Lightfuse Stegodon here as likely being his most powerful play.
I mean, at that point, you certainly build your own board that has to be contended with, and you're basically saying, well, we both have these big boards. Who blinks first, and who's going to go for face? And the light fuse Stegadon, the options that come off of it are going to be extremely important here.
Oh, yeah. The discovery on the Adept is a major deal right now. And that's part of the problem, too, is there's not like a ton of adapts here that are super strong for Bertik. +1/+1's okay. Plus power is okay.
Poisonous
is okay.
Yep.
But health, not really doing much in this spot.
Then you enter those weird, where it's like untargetable stealth, and those are realistically
Wind Fury, is going to hit him for 2 instead of 1.
Stealth might be okay because you have the other light fuse Stegadon, but your health is starting to get pretty low here, so.
That's the other thing, too. Not being able to check all these cards at once means you are very afraid of Savage Roar. You're very afraid.
This is suddenly, okay, +3 health.
Well, it's as good as it's going to get. He's looking towards the second light fuse Stegadon to make a big deal here. And not trading into the Living Mana token, very wise here from Bertik. If he unlocks one more additional mana for ZerO, it means that Savage Roar is a serious threat. Suddenly, ZerO doesn't have that giant board buff, and he's going to have to fight honestly with the minions he's got. So, major power swing. He did get through the turn all right, but Bertik certainly still nervous about this.
Well, 13 power on the board. You have the hero power, or you have the Mark of Yasiraj again. You can only cast the 1. Living Roots, still a 2 damage nuke right there, if need be. Living Roots is certainly a card that I miss from Druid. Really powerful, really flexible. It was probably one of my favorite designed cards from that set in terms of all the different things you can do it. We saw it utilize OTK decks. We saw it in token decks. There's so many different ways you could appreciate Living Roots.
Help felt curve.
Yeah.
It's very similar to the Dark Bomb-esque effect. Helps you fight early. Wise of ZerO here, I think, to suit up a token as well. Where if he does this, if Bertik wants to clear that extra power, it means he's got to give him an extra mana.
All right, well, the Mark of Yasiraj is the choice. Going to go ahead and swing it there into the Stonehill Defender. Stonehill Defender doing a lot of work there to protect from 4 damage. And that is kind of a big deal here with, a lot of what Bertik looking to do, kind of hinging on that light infused Stegadon. Taram's certainly big because it's a taunt, but
this is a tough turn. I'm not sure I like the trades here. Certainly, worried about Quartermaster, worried about another light fuse Stegadon, but that extra pressure there would have meant that Bertik is going to have to play cleanup at a lot of stages. And, you still have to worry about Sunkeeper Taram. Your opponent's played a Stonehill Defender. They're playing Paladin in general. That card is very often included. So I like some of the cleanup, but at the same time, I see a lot of merit to just simply pushing damage and putting Bertik to the test.
Well, Bertik can go ahead and remove 5 minions here and then possibly play down the Taram after to at least put up the big wall. You would get to keep a lot of those minions that you're actually trying. I think all those minions, except for the light fuse Stegadon, because I would have to go into the 4/3 there just to get rid of it. But you are building a strong board. You're building a big taunt. I mean, do you think it's just time to go with the hero power Taram?
It definitely is a play I'm looking at. I think that the shielded mini-bot's probably a little bit better just to add stuff to the board.
Yeah, the only problem with that is that you can't actually buff that with the light fuse Stegadon. I mean, it might end up being, but if you're going to play the Stegadon on the next turn.
Yeah, I think he's looking at the Taram's thing. And, that's the one benefit to health buff from the light fuse Stegadon is he gets to make these trades in the board, completely squash ZerO's resources, and then go bam, bring him back up, put a big taunt in the way. Suddenly he is the one in full control, and ZerO, he's looking like slim chances at this point.
So Savage Roar here would be pretty powerful, all things considered. At least give him a little bit more direct power, but
I think he's just lost control of the board. He's got to clear through his Taram. He can push for 3, or he can trade a minion. Jeeves will draw him a lot of cards, but Bertik has got all the damage.
I was gonna say, now the shoe's on the other foot here. You are staring down a fair bit of power. Do you ever feel like it's maybe worth playing the Living Roots down just to activate the Jeeves because you've got to draw more things? It's such a bad situation now for ZerO because again, Paladin has all these windows where it can be really powerful with this really dude-centric deck.
I mean, the thing here is he's threatened by all the buff cards from Bertik's deck. He's threatened by Quartermaster for lethal. He's threatened by Light Fuse Stegadon, picking up either Wind Fury or +3 attack.
That Taram was off the Stonehill.
Yeah.
Second Taram. I mean, obviously not with a 3/3 board. It's going to just make him 3/3s. But down the road, that is a continued threat because he's only seen the 1.
Yeah, not really much to give here. It's Jeeves. It's make some guys and go ahead. And Bertik is going to have an opportunity for lethal this turn.
All right, just putting the tokens on the board. If there isn't lethal, you're essentially saying the Paladin has to trade. That at least means I'm not taking damage. Whereas if you just use them as burn, you aren't actually accomplishing anything, and you're saying, well, just hit me in the face.
Yeah. Bertik's he's gonna take his time and just make sure he's not missing anything here. But Lightfuse Stegadon is the lead play. Well, get an extra dude in case this fails. And that's +3 attack. Bertik gonna take a 2-1 lead. Fantastic play. And the turn from ZerO, where he didn't play Living Mana, I think is the turn to look at. Would things have panned out differently had he had that extra power early on?
That just goes to show how, at least on Bertik's side, the adapt mechanic can be extremely skill testing in terms of what you actually take there. There was a lot kind of going on in those last 3 to 4 turns that really kind of made the game go the way it did.
Yeah, it was a multi-turn setup. The plus health ended up working out fantastically, especially when he saw the trade into his minion. And that was something ZerO was very concerned about, was the pressure from a Quartermaster or from a second Lightfuse Stegadon. Well, either way, it left him in a fairly poor spot to having the extra 1/1s in place, set up the Sunkeeper Tarim, deliver the final blow with the other Lightfuse Stegadon. Just brilliant play.
We actually have the opportunity to go back and explore that turn 7 that Nathan and I have both been kind of, languishing on. Nathan, why don't you break down this turn and explain exactly kind of what you wanted to see?
So what I like about the board state here for ZerO is that he's got simply a lot on board. And when you're playing an aggressive deck that has buffs, you often can play a range of cards that you don't necessarily have. You don't just play with the cards in your hand, you play with the cards in the deck. So as we walk through the turn and we see what's going on, the fact that he chose to play this defensively is a major deal. So Bertik lands Lightfuse Stegadon, he gets plus health. Where is ZerO actually closing in towards a advantageous board position if he chooses to trade in this spot? Bertik certainly got defenses up, he's certainly threatening very hard here, but I don't think ZerO can pay heed to that. In this spot, he has no real buffs, he has no real anything to go through, he just simply traded through this. And so it left him in a spot with a very weak board. Bertik shredded it apart and then took complete stabilization with the Sunkeeper Tarim. If ZerO simply goes all to the face, Bertik then has to play complete defense from his perspective. It's harder for him to clear these living mana tokens, and as a result, maybe ZerO finds that extra damage, maybe he finds that extra time.
Right, and the plus health off the adapt, we talk about it as kind of being a little bit of one of the weaker options for what you were actually looking for at that point, but the 4 health ended up being pretty clutch, actually, as it allowed him to make these trades, keep his dudes on board, go into the Tarim turn. So just really well navigated by Bertik. And I want to point out in at least the Europe portion of the Hearthstone Wild Open, Paladin against Druid. Druid only has a 38% win rate against the Paladin. So it just goes to show, as a Druid, when the time comes, you really have to go for the throat.
Yeah, you got to have to take risks. If you're in a matchup where things are tough and your opponent's got strong key cards or explosive plays on certain turns, there are things that you just frankly can't respect that much. You've got to go for it and hope things work out the best.
All right, well, Bertik only needs one more game now to go ahead and advance to the next part of the series, where he will be going up against Alb. So very close for Bertik if he wants to end up going to these July finals.
That's right, one game away from that second step he's got to take. A little bit tougher for the lower bracket. In the double elimination, they have to win 2 straight matches to make it to that final portion.
That's that winner's edge.
Love the winner's edge. So tasty.
All right, so we've seen thus far that realistically the more aggressive decks have actually really kind of struggled. We have yet to see in a matchup where an aggressive deck goes against a less aggressive deck, that aggressive deck actually pull it out there. So
it's
again,
been 3 losses for Druid in this set.
You hate to see that if you love to go face.
It's been one of the most popularly played classes in the European Wild Open. Warrior was the most popular, 47 players had brought it. Druid was the second most popular, 44 players brought it. But in this set, it's 0-3.
All right, well, we're going to head into the Aggro Druid Mirror, and I want to keep a watch now on these Galaka Crawlers on this mulligan.
Oh, yeah. This is an extremely key card to the deck. Bloodsail Corsair and Patches is really the best friend of the Aggro Druid deck, just having those extra bodies out for Savage Roar, for Mark of the Lotus, and the like. But Galaka Crawler, he eats one of them and turns into a Totem Golem when that happens. And so Bertik hanging on to this Bloodsail Corsair, I think he's going to play it on turn 1, but he is likely...
You have to play it out. You can't dance around it, and realistically, the farther you get to the deck, the higher odds that Galaka Crawler is going to be there.
I'm curious if you keep it. I know that sounds crazy, but when your opponent's got Galaka Crawler, it's a pure liability. And in this matchup, you're fairly confident your opponent's running 2. Pirate Warrior is one of the most popular classes in Wild because of its power level. And so Aggro Druid not only thrives with the Beast synergy, but it preys on those early pirates. And he's going to play the Bloodsail Corsair. ZerO's got double Galaka Crawler.
ZerO about to have a party with his crabs.
Yeah. And Bertik is invited, but not for the reason you would think.
Well, somebody has to be the actual food. Somebody has to be eaten at this party. And it's these poor pirates, man. It's just like watching what I assume will be the plot of Pirates 6 at this point. It's just crabs eating pirates.
And so now Bertik has a really interesting option in front of himself as well, where he can attack with the patches, then simply use his own Galaka Crawler and force ZerO to play in a more weird fashion, or he can just make a 3-2 and go ahead. And this is something that he certainly does not expect to see, but second Galaka Crawler. Oh my.
Bertik saying, you got one crab. I know you don't have the second crab. And he's wrong. There are 2 crabs in.
Yeah, and now he is very far behind.
Yeah. He messed with the Crabbo. He got the Stabbo. That's all there is to it. And now these are both, being a mirror, these are both just board-centric decks. There's not really a lot of bells and whistles. Occasionally you see like an odd swipe in there, but most of this is one on the board. And look, you just got a 3-4 and then a second 3-4. You're feeling pretty good.
And he blew up 2 minions in the process.
Yeah.
Oh no, you took 2 damage.
In terms of like you're thinking about your most magical turn, you're like, well, I want to play a minion that gets buffed for eating another minion. So minion dead, my minion bigger. I spent 2 mana for a totem golem, no overload. Like that's a pretty magical day.
It's a very magical day. Bertik using the hero power here. He's concerned with ZerO simply buffing up the 1 health minion and not having an effective way to clear it, taking too much damage as a result. So I actually like that he's going with hero power over Haunted Creeper on this turn. But ZerO, he's free to take full advantage of this. So at this stage, almost all of his buffs are going to be powerful, but despite that, I'd like to see him save this Mark of the Lotus for living mana.
I don't necessarily dislike this. I think you've got the edge now. You're pushing. You're the one who's in the driver's seat. Living mana into Mark of the Lotus is kind of a long time off, and maybe you're thinking, I don't even want to get to that point. I just want to start hitting him for 8 damage a turn as opposed to 6.
I mean, there's definitely a lot of merit to that. With Mark of Yasharaj on the following turn and Savage Roar in hand, he's very likely to find just a minion to play and actually kill on turn 5 rather than have the living mana on turn 5. You know,
that's just strictly better.
This way, he potentially gets 5 extra damage out of the Mark of the Lotus immediately. It's 1 on this turn, 2 on the following turn, maybe 2 more on the next.
All right, so Bertik now, finally allowed to be on the board. There's nothing there that is going to be eaten by any other minion. Everything's pretty clean from this point on.
I will be curious to see if ZerO wants to clean up board at all and just buy value, or if he's just going to simply push damage. And given last turn, oh my, given that draw, it's almost certain he's pushing damage.
That is a spicy draw, to be sure.
Bertik is going to have a tough time pushing through this. But honestly, almost any way you slice it, ZerO has... he's zeroing in on the win.
Nice.
So that was a tough one.
I'm enjoying our ZerO-based puns in this series.
We've made more than 0 of them.
We really do need to get one of those little drums up here. And just, yeah.
I actually would like to see him play defensively on this turn, though. With living mana, he's almost locked to take the game if he just Mark the Wilds and just kills these minions. Savage Roar maybe kills his board, but I guess if you see Savage Roar, you're pretty happy with it. I like.
I'm going to the dome. I'm just taking it upstairs.
Damage, 11 damage. I'm sorry, 12 damage. That sounds sweet. It's a lot of damage.
And Bertik's just going to actually just say, like, that's it. And we are now going to match points. So this is... both players have been pushed to the brink.
Well, so far, Druid has only defeated Druid. So that zeroes itself out.
I was going to say, we had a 100% chance that an aggro deck was going to win.
We're still at effectively 0 wins for Druid. It had to defeat itself in order to win. It literally had to win the game in that spot. I don't think there's any draw potential.
I'm going to make a note. Aggro...
sucks.
Won a game. Good job, Aggro. Put a little exclamation mark there. I mean it. Good job, Aggro.
It's tough. Again, they're very feast or famine strategies. When they get offset, they're going to look bad. But when they don't get checked at every step of the way, they just go, oh my gosh, how do I beat that? It's so overpowered. Got to play early clear.
Well, both these players on match point now, but again, they had to, compete in a field of 64 other players. Let's go ahead and take a look at how they got to this point. Bertik had quite a road there. We see him go 3-2 against Sumi, and then from there on out, it was all the way down a very long bracket to make it to this point.
It's been a tough field. You had to be top 64 in your region's ladder in Wild in order to qualify for this event. At that stage, you are fighting stacked fields.
Yeah, you actually see ZerO already beat Bertik.
Yeah.
In the upper bracket to send him to the lower bracket. So.
And he had to go farm.
I do really enjoy that name. Gotta go farm. Like I want to hang out, but
gotta go farm.
Gotta go farm. All right, we see there ZerO also losing to Alb 987. That was actually what sent him to the lower bracket. So we see these players really had a long road to get to this point, and they're so close. They are just this and then a series away from the live finals. And these are players who are out there playing Wild a lot. This is not just kind of they jumped into it. This is this is what they specialize in.
Yeah, and that's something to really think about is as the metagame develops, these are things they've had time to think about or even experience in their practice or in their time playing against other players. Something that's really cool to see, though, is that the fact they're rematching all at this point as well. It's like they all lost to each other, and then they're all back in the mix.
But that's great. When you lose to someone, having the opportunity to kind of like get redemption,
revenge,
is great. Revenge is a dish best served whenever you can have it. Breakfast, lunch, dinner.
That's the classic saying.
Yeah, as the scholars of our time once said, when revenge is on a bagel, you can have revenge anytime. All right, so the final series or final game of the series has to be Druid versus Mage.
Yeah.
What do you think? What do you think here?
This is, again, kind of a replay of the same matchup we just saw, if it in fact is Freeze Mage. I think Freeze Mage is one of the most popular wild versions that we see, but there are Reno Mages out there as well. They operate very similarly to a lot of Freeze Mage lists. They don't have quite the same combo potential in terms of burst from hand, but they have a lot more stabilizing tools with Reno Jackson. They have more power with Kazakus. They have a few more tools early on that you don't typically see inside a Freeze Mage deck. So you're not going to get stuck with a lot of weird cards in hand, but you might get stuck with a lot of 5 or 6 cost cards in hand. So there
a little clunky, yeah.
There are definitely benefits to both sides, but you have the jackpot payoff sometimes with Reno Jackson to completely shut out a game.
All right, so you mentioned 2 very popular archetypes in Wild. You did forget the third, though, and one of my favorites, it's Tempo Mage.
Yes.
Flamewaker was obviously rotated out. Wow, nice second. Production just on it. We just said it. They just... Good times. But yeah, the Flamewaker, an incredibly powerful tool that made Tempo Mage go. The ability to just have that damage spread. You can Thor Sand to discount spells in your hands, and you just go off. Tempo Mage nowadays doesn't have Flamewaker. It's still a powerful deck, but it's transitioned its focus to being more about that secret synergy, as opposed to just spamming out spells with Flamewaker.
And that's one of the big benefits that you have with any Flamewaker deck is just the amount of damage that you have in excess with a lot of utility cards. Primordial Glyph, of course, a welcome addition to that. There is technically a chance to go to infinity with Primordial Glyph and Flamewaker, albeit an incredibly low chance with the additional mage spells that are in there. But you do have Unstable Portal, which has the major ramp potential, but also some of the failure rate built in. You have Arcane Blast back in the mix, which is one of the best ways to answer Totem Golem alongside a Spell Power minion. You have Mad Scientist in there. And frankly, there's a lot of different ways to build a deck. Like the shell we just showed you is only one way. I've seen ways where players, they play Emperor Thaurissan and spare part minions to just get a lot of extra spells.
Toshli back in the day was extremely popular. You generate those low mana spells in the form of spare parts. So a lot of different ways it can be done, and looks like this is going to be Reno Mage, probably the N'Zoth variant. We can see the Death Lord, we can see the Piloted Shredder, and Bertik just needs to get this win on aggro. Can aggro break the curse today?
It might be able to. This matchup is certainly tough, though. ZerO, once again, is Galaka Crawler. He's got Death Lord, and he's got Piloted Shredder. And
for a Reno Mage, that's a curve.
It's a very strong curve. Death Lord is pulling overtime in this matchup. Bertik's only got 2 minions I think he'd like to see off of a Death Lord proc. When it dies, your opponent gets a minion from their deck for free. So Vicious Fledgling, great option there. Jeeves can sometimes be a big one. But think about all the 1/2s and the 1/1s that Bertik has in his deck. It's not the greatest reload that you get from Death Lord. Death Lord's a very risky card versus a N'Zoth deck, for instance, where your opponent can get Cairn, they can get Sylvanas, and really accelerate that N'Zoth potential. But in an aggro matchup, it very much shines if your opponent doesn't have that giant mid-range threat.
And if you're at home and you've been playing Wild and you've been playing and seeing a lot of Pirate Warrior, and you're wondering, well, where is it? It's just neither player thought to bring Pirate Warrior despite the overall power level of it. So that's why you're not seeing it. And Pirate Warrior is one of those decks that actually does just go fast enough a lot of times to beat the Reno Mage.
Well, this is an interesting opening hand. Bertik's drawn both Innervates, and that can give you some explosive turns, but he has no buff and he has no Jeeves. And those are the 2 major cards, or the 2 major things, rather, that make Innervates extremely powerful, is when you're able to empty your hand all in one push and set up a nigh insurmountable board position. So Bertik, he's tempted to play this living mana right away. He's concerned with Galaka Crawler, he's concerned with hero power, but again, he wants that one big swing. He wants everything to happen at once.
Has me feeling a little bit of anxiety around playing Pirates at this point based on what happened last time, knowing that Galaka Crawler is being teched into so many decks. But again, to the point I made earlier, you have to play it. It's in your deck. If it doesn't get checked, it's generating pressure. You could potentially draw the buffs to make that wide board really work for you.
He's going to go for it. And he's thinking about getting Galaka Crawlered. We can see it's there, but Bertik doesn't know it.
This is where the Jaws theme starts playing. You see that single Single pincer on the top of the water. And okay, he's actually going to play around it. Just play down the living roots. And he's like, you can't Galaka Crawler this.
He's thinking to himself, he knows it's too devastating of a turn if he happens to get Galaka Crawlered. It's difficult to play around a one-of card. It's very difficult. But Bertik's going to do it. And going into turn 3, this has been fairly brilliant play from Bertik so far. If he gets Galaka Crawlered on turn 3, it means the Death Lord's not coming down. It means it's stuck in hand and waiting for a future turn. I love the way that Bertik has played this.
It's very subtle. It's very subtle disruption technique. It's making sure that you're getting your opponent to play things on inoptimal turns, suboptimal turns rather, to just say like, okay, well, this is a 4-mana or 3-mana card, but you're basically going to pay 4 mana for it, and then to your point, it kind of landlocks other big cards for later down the road when they're kind of a little more, well, they're actually just more inefficient to play.
Yeah, I mean, the risk of drawing patches is very low in that spot. So doing it this way just gives him extra strength versus Galaka Crawler. And
do you coin this out? Do you coin out a hero power here?
Well, I'm looking at just the hero power take in general. What must have his options been? Is this the one you want to take? I mean, I'm guessing Steady Shot and Life Tap are very high on the totem pole. The 1/1's definitely great if you manage to draw buffs, but he's going to innervate. He might go for the whole hand.
Gonna eat one of his own pirates.
Oh no, Bertik doesn't have the time. He innervates and Galaka Crawler's still in hand.
Oh, that is devastating.
It's a blunder.
I wonder too if ZerO saw where the cursor was hovering, if it did in fact hover over one of the pirate cards to let him know what it was.
I'm curious if that even matters. Like, ZerO is still in a tough turn on his own. I mean, the extra pressure from Bertik, that is a significant mistake that is made. But is Deathlord better than Galaka Crawler in this spot, simply for mana considerations? Is it a little bit worse when you see board buffs from your opponent?
I mean, the way you're mapping out your future turns here, yeah, you play the Death Lord next turn, and if the Pirate... Yeah, I assume the Pirates get traded in because you don't want to give the buff to the Crawler, but if for some reason the Pirate still sticks around, yeah, you've got Crawler ping. You've got so much flexibility in terms of what you can do. You can just play the Shredder. Yeah, I like the Death Lord on this turn.
Bertik, no buff, no Jeeves. This is the nightmare scenario for Bertik. So not having the Galaka Crawler out a turn earlier did not matter in this particular game. But it's not something you ever want to see. And if he does not draw a buff, a living mana, or a Jeeves next turn, Bertik is in a heap of trouble.
If you never played in the era of Deathlord, this is sometimes what Deathlord just did, and that's why you ran the card. It shut down aggro.
Yeah.
You couldn't get by it. And then from there, things just kind of spiraled out of control. You gave the control deck entirely too much time to get its resources, get its mana, and then from there you lose the game.
It's definitely an uphill road from there. Wisely trading off the Pirate in this spot. So I think his disruption did pay off this game. Whew. That's a good draw.
And this is a great situation for ZerO. He's playing with full knowledge of what Bertik has, which is nothing. Nothing in hand. You can see exactly what you're doing. You are playing the information war in a very one-sided fashion because you have all the information.
This is purely calculable for ZerO at this stage. So I like the Frostbolt. Choke the board down as hard as you can.
Just take your time. Just take your time, clear the board.
Mitigate buff pressure.
The only things you're really maybe worried about at this point, living mana, Jeeves.
Mark of Yasharaz also is something to consider here. I think there is some merit for ZerO to simply take out the Haunted Creeper to wipe out Mark of Yasharaz as being a value draw for Bertik. You'd rather limit the board pressure and keep buffs in general from being stronger. I like this too.
Yeah, just realizing he's working on one card a turn, but there's the Jeeves.
That's
and
a huge draw for Bertik right now, too. There's no cards in his hand. This is 3 fresh draws. ZerO has no way to kill this.
This is the Fresh Maker. This is as good as it gets, and that's exactly what he needed at this point. Living mana would have been great, but it still would have been nothing on this turn, so we'll have to see what Jeeves does.
Wow. I mean, this is a major turn. Bertik simply needs to navigate this now in a fashion where he maximizes his potential for draws. So I like him actually keeping the Beast around in this spot, but him trading it off means he's looking at Mark of the Lotus. He's looking at Power of the Wild. He's looking at Savage Roar. He wants to make the board as awkward as possible for ZerO and try to get to that point. But now he's actually just trading off minions in addition to that. That's a very strange trade, I'd say, from the 1 power. Maybe he's looking at Volcanic Potion being played against this and then being able to simply hero power back.
Bertik getting a little bit chippy there, and we see his demeanor is he's stressed, and understandably so. These last 2 games have really not gone his way.
Not at all.
And he's having to dig deep here. This is just, he's got to find some way to kind of make something out of nothing on this game. And yeah, the Jeeves was good. The Savage Roar is certainly what you want to see there. You have some more minion pressure in the Firefly, but there isn't necessarily anything that's like a KO draw on your deck at this point.
No siree, Bob. And Bertik, the breath of fresh air. Jeeves lives through the turn. And now so much pressure is going to come from this. Bertik is back in this game.
Bertik plays the Savage Roar, just giving it some thought now, just trying to slow down and make sure he's making the correct play with these attacks.
Wow, not going to go for minions here off that either. He wants to have fresh traits. Body's a body at this point. Ooh.
Oh, wow.
That one has Death Rattle draw card attached to it, so it's not the drop Bertik wanted to see from it, but there are plenty of drops he didn't want to see there. And now the question is, do you keep your Jeeves fresh, or do you trade off one of your extra bodies?
I mean, Bertik's already started trading at this point. This is one of those things where is it really worth it to just go kind of 0.5 on this play where you do some trading and then you don't do a bunch of trading? Yeah, you're making the trades require some tempo to deal with the Jeeves there, as opposed to the Shredder just trading it naturally, but...
Yeah, I like that he is trading, because Jeeves is certainly the most important facet of his board at this point. Finds Living Mana, has Mark of the Lotus. ZerO still no board clear. Rob, this game could be turning around.
Yeah, that Jeeves sticking is just absolutely not what ZerO needs right now. Sylvanas coming down, though, it looks like, just choosing to not get the value on the Crawler.
This is I think, probably his best play. It's just the most expensive card in his hand. None of his cards really affect the board in a strong manner. He's got to do something to start offsetting this board. His life total is high enough that he can invest into something and chop down turn after turn. The Sylvanas is a card that Bertik's almost never going to trade into, and that means Jeeves is threatened.
Yeah, taking a moment to just really highlight what has made Sylvanas so great prior to her being rotated into the Hall of Fame is the board disruption. It makes it very difficult to build around. That said, if you're just making a bunch of small things, and Sylvanas gets one of them, it's really not the end of the world.
Yeah, I mean, this was just to ensure the check on Jeeves for the following turn, but look at how many cards Bertik has drawn. It's 7 cards that Jeeves has drawn now.
Yeah, we can see the card counters on the side just showing us a difference. 11 to 19. Jeeves has been putting in work.
And his board's huge right now. ZerO still no board clear. He has got to be terrified.
Sludge Belcher Crawler, right? He's
got to be terrified of buffs. I think you do go for Sludge Belcher Crawler. I mean, maybe some Mad Scientist, Forgotten Torch, and Crawler. He's got to address the board, and every turn's going to be scary from here on out. He doesn't have an Ice Block down. He doesn't have a way to heal in hand.
Yeah, moment of silence for that Jeeves. It did exactly what it needed to do to give Bertik some room here to potentially still have life in this game. All right, so Crawler does deal with the Pirate on the board. Sludge Belcher comes down, and this is a big board for ZerO.
Oh, another buff gets drawn, too.
Just leave it out on the field. Just go.
Giddy up. Is this enough for Bertik to come from behind in this game? His early start, not the best. He played it brilliantly against the Galaka Crawler. He found the Jeeves, drew him 7 extra cards. He still has a lot of work to do. And
well, now he has these 3/4 minions. That's pretty good for dealing with the Sludge Belcher. You are getting to make some value trades here, so that's upside. The Sylvanas, the only real minion that well, I mean, you don't want her taking anything in general, but I think the 2 minions that stand out that would be worst case scenario she steals would be the Vicious Fledgling, the Haunted Creeper. You're certainly relying on them to do some measure of the work. How much are you trading, though, at this point?
I think it's minimal. I think at this point he's got to push the damage and look for Savage Roar to be his major out. ZerO finds Ice Block. I don't know about this one, Rob. I think that ZerO's investment into Sylvanas is seeing the payoff this turn, and I think that Ice Block was the critical draw.
It's hard to disagree. The Ice Block there. The problem is that, okay, the way I see this, ZerO actually doesn't have a big board sweep here. He's pretty much forced to just do minion combat trades to get things going, and the rate Bertik is actually stocking up this board with the living mana in hand, I still think Bertik has a lot of daylight.
He definitely does. But these are not going to be happy turns for him.
I mean, Ice Block is obviously a tool you want to have. It's a good draw. It's obviously going to at least buy you one turn, but if you're not able to successfully address the board, the Forgotten Torch is pretty big, the ping onto a 1 health minion, and then the Ice Block maybe?
Is ZerO going for a big steal here? He's trying to ensure a steal on a 3-4, it looks like. I'd actually be pretty surprised if he didn't trade into the Vicious Fledgling, because that's the biggest threat on board.
Just get rid of it.
So he's simply trying to mitigate the weaker minions on board so that he steals just something more valuable. Doesn't need to steal the Vicious Fledgling to win. Just get something good. Wow.
So, minion combat trading, Forgotten Torch, pinging, just doing whatever he can, ZerO, to get this board to heal. He does manage to bring it down to a pair of 3-4s. He gets the Haunted Creeper, has to be looking at that. You know, it's less power than the 3-4, but you are preventing the reload on the board from the 1-1 spiders.
Oh, Bertik looks stressed. I mean...
There's one play here.
I'm not seeing a trade.
No. There's one play here.
I actually think I like the Savage Roar a lot. This is going to set 0-2-3. He's going to use this to clear off.
No, it's important to get the hero power.
Crawler.
The hero power essentially in there, since you don't have the ability to do 1 damage anymore with the hero power.
I like this. Wow, and ZerO still no board clear.
Making the recognition too, and I think a lot of people when they play this deck think Savage Roar has to be the finisher, but there are a lot of situations where it absolutely isn't.
Counterspell right after the living mana.
Flame Strike.
No mana for the Flame Strike. He's got Ice Block up, but he'll be popped at 2. And being popped at 2 is not the worst thing in the world for him. Bertik gave up his Shapeshift hero power. And as a result of that, he doesn't have a way to deal that 1 direct damage. He has to have a minion to do it.
He's seen both Savage Roars too, hasn't he?
Yes.
Yes. So you can't even use the Savage Roar to act as a soft hero power there to just do that last 2 damage.
I think ZerO is going to see the route to get there at this stage. You know, I look at this from Bertik and I wonder, would it have been wise to hero power in Forgo to try to set him at 1? But he doesn't have an access to deal 1 damage. Every minion he has is almost going to deal 1 damage or 2 damage at that point.
This is a problem with Finley. Sometimes you don't get what you're looking for, and then you end up with a hero power, which is situationally worse. And in a situation where you need to do direct damage, the Paladin hero power is strictly worse than Shapeshift.
I'll show them all.
No way to draw from that Marka Yashiraj. That is about as dead of a card as you get. Wait a minute here. I take that back. From Bertik's perspective, Flame Strike is the major board wiping tool here. So if he actually suits up his 3-4 and pops the block, he can then trade down the board and have that 3-4 potentially be buffed to a 5-6 and live through a Flame Strike in that instance. Maybe that's his route to victory at this point.
Still need to have enough damage to deal with a potential barrier, though, which is not barrier. That got pulled by the Mad Scientist. It's duplicate.
So there's the pop. ZerO's at 1.
Bertik knows 1 card came off of Primordial Glyph.
The way that he's attacked. Can't really keep the 3-4 alive in this instance. Just going to load up the board and say, you know what, he hasn't had a board clear yet. Probably doesn't have one. Oh my. What did Bertik miss? Another one. Oh, he duplicated the wrong minion. That's what his reaction was. Flame Strike hits. Nothing for Bertik.
No ability to do 1 damage. Counterspell plays around the one-off swipe if it's in there.
Is ZerO going to stabilize at 1 health? I think this is it.
Oh my goodness. What if you had a hero power that just dealt 1 damage, Nathan? And that Fire Blast just keeps the Paladin hero power in check for the rest of the game if he wants it to. Zoth's going to bring back Sludge Belcher, going to bring back Deathlord, going to bring back Piloted Shredder, Sylvanas.
Yeah, this is game over. Look at the board.
Now Swipe is still an out.
Swipe is an out.
That's
Living
not
Man is
Swipe.
not. How much damage does ZerO have?
Brought back
9.
the Mistress of Mixtures, too. He's going back up to 5 if he plays the Living Mana.
Wow. And he's got Echo of Medivh in hand as well. That was the lock on that turn.
Yeah, Bertik realizes it. Bertik sees it.
Oh, that's so tough, so close, and so far away. Finley does have sometimes that effect where it just provides you with weaker options in the situation.
Now, we saw Bertik had a long road to get to this point, too, just to make it all the way here, and then have this kind of game.
It's emotery.
I don't think this is good-natured emoting, too. This is frustration emoting.
You think so?
I think so.
I don't know. I think it's good-natured. I think he's like, hey, you got me.
Your glass is half full kind of guy.
Your glass is half empty kind of guy, Rob.
That's why we make the perfect duo here. We have a glass that is exactly middle.
Just what a fantastic recovery for ZerO. Lacking Flame Strike the entire time. Bertik, no draw, and ZerO now moves himself one step closer to being at the live Wild Finals.
Yeah, he's going to have to take on Alb 987 to do that, but gosh, what a doozy of a game that last one was. Just starting all the way from the beginning with the wasted Innervate, essentially, all the way up till that point where the Paladin hero power held him back.
Not really that much of a surprise. Paladin hero power's not a very strong one, and this turn was a bit of a disaster here. Bertik spent so much time thinking as we roll through it. Watch his reaction as he moves through this. A pair of Innervates in hand. This is a game that's based around that explosive start. He wants to get the Galaka Crawler online and start pressuring. He launches the Innervate. He launches the attack. There goes the Crawler. Not in time. Misses it. Ooh. Can't quite see it. So Deathlord lands there in significant measure, and then later on, the Galaka Crawler comes back to haunt Bertik, being able to wipe it out and just completely clear down the board. The investment into Sylvanas, I think, one of the brilliant moments from ZerO in this game, recognizing he didn't need to handle the pressure immediately, take his time, get max value out of that card.
I mean, it's such a display of brinksmanship playing that Sylvanas on turn 6 and saying, okay, to your point, I have high health. I have a little bit of room to work with. The Sylvanas was out there, was trading with minions, ultimately got the trade, brought the 2/3 buffed Haunted Creeper over, so really well navigated by ZerO in this entire series.
I think so as well. I think he's been on point in a lot of situations. His aggro play, I think, left a little bit to be desired. I would like to see him push a little bit harder.
Well played.
But you know, as far as his control play, it was pretty spot on. It's kill a bunch of minions, recognize when you're safe, recognize when you're ahead, eliminate the possibility for outs in this situation.
Yeah, we saw there a little bit of the exchange back and forth. I want to talk about just competing really quickly when you get to that point, when you've battled so far, you're sent to the lower bracket early. It is such an emotional investment. You're saying, okay, I have to wait a few days and I'm going to get back into it, wait 1 day or two. And then you get to this point, it goes to game 5, the clutch moment. It's mentally exhausting.
It's a hard loss to take, but that's what makes champions at the end of the day in card games is perseverance. You take one bad loss, you shrug it off, you work hard for the next one. Opportunities are the players you pay attention to. The guys who are constantly reaching that top spot are the ones you got to look out for. We celebrate the winners, and rightfully so, but year after year, those resumes get built, top 8 after top 8 after top 8.
Yeah, I hope to see more from Bertik, at least in the wild format. Maybe we'll see him in standard someday as well. Let's go ahead and take a look at the bracket, however. We saw first up, it was Alb 987 taking on General. The General just put on a clinic there.
Oh, yeah.
Won pretty handily with his control style. And then it was Bertik versus ZerO. ZerO now advances to take on Alb 987. So very excited to watch that one. Obviously, the one we have coming up next. Nathan, is there anything, obviously you're watching those matches. Is there anything that stands out to you about Alb 987 as he goes to fight against ZerO?
I think the thing to look at here is the more unconventional lineup that ZerO has brought, which is lacking a warrior in it, and the more conventional lineup that Alb has brought, where warrior is very much present in that lineup. It is the most popular deck in the field for the Europe Wild playoffs, and certainly one of the most powerful ones as well. Curious to see if it's going to draw a ban or if we're going to get to see it played.
I would like to actually see some Pirate at this point. I feel like my expectations on what this would be thus far has not had enough Pirates, but Alba ZerO up next will be battling for a chance to join 3 other players at the live Hearthstone Wild Finals in July. Representing China, it's Shanghai Yuyi, SH Royal Baze, and now the General. One of those players will be up there next to General.
That's right, but there's still plenty more to come. We have Americas after this and Asia Pacific later on in the day. Not even half the field has been decided just yet, so plenty more Hearthstone to come.
Next, as we mentioned, we will have Alb987 taking on ZerO for that final spot at the Europe Hearthstone Wild Finals. We'll be right back.